afternoon and welcome back to Football League World TV. We've got another debate show this afternoon where we're going to be looking at three Championship players whose future at their club looks uncertain heading into the final days of the January transfer window. Joining me is Toby Wilding, my colleague. How are you getting on, Toby?
Yeah, good, thanks. Really looking forward to this. Obviously, it's really getting into the business end of the window now. So this is when you're expecting all these deals to really come to the fore. So it gives us plenty to talk about, and should be a really good show just to dig into a few of what could be plenty of sagas that are going to be going on over the next week or so.
Absolutely. You're looking forward to the final few days of the transfer window. It's going to be busy for us boys at Football League World, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much to keep covered, and lots of teams who really probably do still need to do business. So when it gets into that situation where clubs have to get these last few buys in to either give the promotion hopes a boost or give them a chance of avoiding relegation, it does really make it interesting to see what teams can come up with in terms of bringing players in or potentially letting them go.
Absolutely. We're streaming across Facebook, YouTube and Twitter this afternoon. So if you are joining us and you want to discuss a certain transfer, get yourselves in the comments and let us know your thoughts. We're going to get straight into our first pick, who is Tom Lawrence from Derby County. So Lawrence is looking like he might be the highest profile departure from Derby this month. The Mail are reporting that Bournemouth and Queen's Park Rangers are both in talks with Derby's administrators about a potential deal for the 28-year-old. He scored 8 goals this season for Derby and captained the side as well. I think by far he's their he's probably their best player in terms of what he's done in sort of his career and that kind of thing. Obviously some good young players at Derby as well, but there's a little surprise that there's the interest there in Lawrence, is the Toby?
No, not at all. When you sort of look at his contributions over the course of the season, I mean, as you say, I think it's QPR and Bournemouth, the two who are supposedly talking about him at the minute, and obviously they're two sides who are pushing for promotion right now from the Championship. So that sort of shows you how good he has been. I mean, obviously Bournemouth know all about that from their trip to Pride Park earlier this season. So yeah, in that sense, we've seen he can make things happen even in a side, sort of really struggling against so many odds and expectations this season. So that sort of shows you just how big an impact he could have now that he's reached this stage of his career where he really is playing at a high level. And I think as well, as you mentioned, he's captained Derby this season, and he's really coped well with that sort of pressure of doing that under such difficult circumstances in terms of, keeping this team together, keeping the morale high, helping to maintain that belief that maybe they could pull off the greatest of great escapes. And so I think as well as his ability on the pitch, the fact that he's sort of really shown those leadership qualities over the course of this season, that too makes him a really appealing target for clubs who are looking to do a bit of business in the late stages of the window.
Yeah, and that's all combined with Derby's off-field turmoil as well, which makes him, a saleable asset. It's said that he's one of the highest earners, if not the highest earner, currently at Pride Park. Do you think that makes it a priority for the administrators to get Lawrence off the books despite his importance to the team?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think it puts them in a bit of a difficult position here. I mean, as you say, with the wages, it's on clearing some of them off the bill is going to obviously be important when you consider that they need to show this proof of funds to get them through to the end of the season. And I think obviously if they could fetch a transfer fee for him as well, that could, given how good he is and how valuable he is, that could fetch a decent fee as well. But then on the flip side to that, you look at sort of this from the perspective of one of these groups who might be interested in buying the club. Tom Lawrence, to them, would be seen as one of Derby's biggest assets, you feel. And if they were to, say, keep hold of him, then he would be a key player in potentially Derby having any chance of avoiding relegation this season. And obviously, for potential buyers, Derby become a much more appealing club if they are still in the Championship than in League One. And so in that sense, keeping Lawrence is going to be important. So I think there's a lot of pressure on the administrators at Derby here to make sure they are, finding that balance and, finding a deal that works for all parties. Because if they can get funds for him that get the Derby through to the end of the season, then obviously that's really important. And if they see that out and sort of takeover goes through anyway, then it could actually open the door for Derby further down the line in terms of what they can do with the squad. But at the same time, that they don't want to lose him for too little or whatever, and then sort of have that massive miss on the pitch in terms of the battle to avoid relegation that, sort of potentially puts bidders off if maybe it is the fact that Derby are a Championship club that's drawing them to the Rams at the minute. It's just, there's so many variables in there to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. We're debating, players with an uncertain future in the Championship at the minute, picking our top three for those that are just joining us. So get yourselves in the comments if you want to discuss a certain player or any of the three that we're going to mention. Tom Lawrence is certainly one of those with the reports that are going around at the minute. Toby, out of the two clubs linked at the minute, I think they were linked last night, Bournemouth and Queen's Park Rangers said to be interested. Who do you feel is the better fit, and where, if anywhere, do you see Lawrence ending up come January 31st?
Yeah, it's a tough one to call. I mean, for him, they're both decent destinations. They're both clubs who are, as we say, pushing for promotion. So that has to make either side an appealing prospect for Lawrence himself. Personally, I think from his point of view, maybe QPR could be more tempting when you sort of look at the options that Bournemouth have in particular. At the Vitality Stadium, they've got the likes of Junior Stanislas, Jamal Lowe, Morgan Rogers, Jadon Anthony, Emiliano Marcondes, Ryan Christie. They're all sort of in that sort of attacking midfield role that you would associate Lawrence with. So he goes there, and I think he's got a bigger battle on his hands, maybe, shall we say, to get in the side and get regular football than he might do at QPR, where that their options don't seem quite as deep in that position to me, looking at the makeup of their squad. So I do think that could potentially, if it comes down to a choice between the two clubs for Lawrence, I would be leaning towards QPR in that respect. I think also you sort of Bournemouth are stuttering a bit at the minute, aren't they, in terms of their form, whereas QPR, obviously, they dropped a couple of points against Swansea last night, but on the whole, they're really starting to sort of come to the fore in this promotion race. So I do wonder whether that as well could help make them potentially a more appealing option for Lawrence when he comes to making that decision. Although, of course, got to remember, it has sort of been suggested that he is potentially happy at Derby despite the situation. So it shouldn't be completely ruled out at this minute. I suppose that he might well decide to stay there and try and see this battle for survival in the Championship through there, which you would obviously have to commend him for if he was to do that in the circumstances. But by that same extent, you couldn't blame him if he was to want to move on.
Yeah, I think one other thing that Lawrence needs to weigh up as well, if he is going to move, as you say, it's not, out of the realms of possibility that he stays with Derby. But if he is going to move at 28, he's going to be wanting to take the step into the Premier League. And I do wonder whether Queen's Park Rangers' his chances this season. And I think if he went to Bournemouth and it didn't quite happen for the Cherries this year in terms of promotion, whether they're better placed next year for a more sustained push with somebody like Lawrence in the squad. Would you agree with that, Toby?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably a fair assessment in terms of what Bournemouth can offer long term. And I think you've got to remember as well, they're a more recent Premier League side than the QPR. So obviously the funds that makes available to them, both in terms of potentially if it comes down to a bidding war for Lawrence, but also in terms of what they could invest or what they could afford to keep from their side currently. If they do stay in the Championship, it might, as you say, ensure that they are better placed in terms of the squad that they are able to put together in the summer to mount another promotion push next season, should they need to do so.
That's Derby then. We're going to jump across the East Midlands for our next selection. Next on the agenda is Nottingham Forest forward Brennan Johnson. The Athletic are reporting that Brentford are attempting to lure Johnson away from the City ground late in the January transfer window, but he may cost around £20 million in the coming days, which would be a club record fee for Brentford. Let's start with the fee in question here then when it comes to Johnson. Do you think 20 million is about right, or do you think it's a little bit inflated?
I think it's in the right sort of ballpark, in fairness, maybe towards the higher end of that sort of range that they should perhaps be demanding. But I don't blame them for setting the stall out at that sort of level for us. I mean, Brennan Johnson has got 18 months left on his contract, so Forest still know that even if he doesn't go this month and it becomes apparent that he won't be signing a new deal for whatever reason, and obviously it still remains to be seen whether or not that will happen. Forest's own promotion push will no doubt have a say in that, but what it does mean is that Forest will know they can stand firm this month, and unless something ridiculous comes in, and if that happens, they are still secure in the fact that they can receive a decent fee for him come the summer, which could still be useful. So I think in that sense, it is the right sort of approach to take, especially when you consider sort of how important he is to this team with regards to sort of the form they're on at the minute and the push they are making for promotion. We saw that again last night with his contribution in the win over Barnsley, just how big a part of this side he is under Steve Cooper right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Another goal and an assist last night in a 3-0 win against Barnsley takes him to 7 goals for the season, as well as 6 assists. He's only 20 years old, so he's got years and years ahead of him to make that step up to the Premier League. The only sort of sticking point here for Forest is his contract, as you mentioned. By the time it gets to the summer, if they do stick out till the summer, he's only got 12 months left on his deal, which will, of course, drive the price down, despite his form driving the price up at the moment. But as you mentioned there, Johnson's really important to Forest push for promotion at the minute. With that in mind and the riches of the Premier League, if Forest get into the playoffs and then eventually win the playoffs, let's say, would you be minded to sort of be knocking back these £20 million bids, quite emphatically at this moment in time?
Yeah, I think that has to come into the consideration. I think we've sort of seen this mentioned with other players as well at clubs where they're in a similar position. And, that sort of fee that Forest would be getting for Brennan Johnson, if it is, say, 20 million, yes, it's a lot, but in comparison to what they would be getting if they kept him around and he carried on playing a big part in in a promotion push that proved successful, then you could potentially be bringing them in sort of well over 100 million through TV money, and the sort of increase then from there in following and whatnot in the Premier League, and obviously the parachute payments, even if they come down, there's a lot more that Forest could potentially receive from that than from a simple sale of Johnson right here, right now. Obviously, the question for Forest is how confident are they that they can do that, even with Johnson in their side? Obviously, the 7th in the table at the minute. I think it's just the 1 point off the playoffs, so they're well in that sort of group of teams who are definitely in contention at the minute. But obviously, Forest know all too well of how quickly things can change. So it's a difficult balancing act there. But I think, given the fact that they have got that sort of insurance that they could still get something for him in the summer, I think that means that, considering the size of the prize in comparison to sort of the potential blow, I think it's got to be worth them taking a chance on keeping him and then reassessing the situation with regards to either a contract or a sale again in the summer, depending on how the next few months of the campaign play out.
It feels very like the situation that Blackburn are in with Ben Brereton Diaz. That's, of course, your club, Toby. My club, Leeds United, are also said to be interested in Johnson in the report from The Athletic, although Brentford are firmly in the driving seat. But Leeds have had a heavy sort of scouting mission when it comes to Johnson over the years. Can we see Leeds getting involved late in the day if Brentford look like they're going to make their move?
It's really tough, isn't it, with Leeds? You never sort of seem to know what they're going to do, what their sort of approach is going to be in the transfer market. I mean, from what we've been sort of reading and hearing, it does sound like it's Red Bull Salzburg midfielder Brendan Aronson or nothing for Leeds at the minute, and you can sort of understand that in comparison with Johnson. I mean, there's sort of talk about 20 million bids being put in from Leeds for Aronson. So in that sense, it does seem as though they have the funds there to, make a bid for Johnson if they want to. But, you look at Leeds' squad at the minute and you look at sort of the options they've got out in the wide areas right now, the likes of Rafinha, Daniel James, Jack Harrison, they just seem to me to be better stacked in those positions right now than they are in a lot of other sort of areas of their squad, like we say, the midfield position that they're looking at with Aronson, I think, as well. If they were going to change focus from that, I'd be looking much more at a centre forward cover for Patrick Bamford rather than another winger, because they've really struggled without sort of his goal scoring presence in the box this season. Fullback as well, that's another area I'm still not convinced Leeds are up to full strength on, especially at right back, where with Cody Drammer's loan to Cardiff, they look to be short on cover for Luke Ayling. So whilst I think Leeds have the funds there, and whilst Johnson could be a decent signing for them, he just, to me, he doesn't really seem like a player who they need to be prioritising at the minute if they are to make any late moves in the January window.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd agree with that. And it's looking like it's Brentford in the driving seat for Johnson. So a couple of days of anxiety maybe for the Nottingham Forest fans as they look to keep hold of, a real key player for Steve Cooper. Another saga that Forest seem to be centre of is the future of Jed Wallace at Millwall, with a real interest from Nottingham Forest in signing him. Football League World understands that Forest are pushing for this deal in the final few days of the transfer window. Wallace is another that's out of contract in the summer, and his future's very much up in the air. As we've just been talking about Johnson, let's start with Johnson, and the scenario plays out that Johnson leaves Forest this winter. Does that heighten the need for somebody like Wallace to come in, Toby?
Yeah, I think it would do. I mean, if as we've been saying, Johnson's a massive part of Forest hopes of promotion this season, so I don't think they could let him go and then expect to carry on without bringing in a replacement and continue to push for the playoffs and maybe automatics without bringing in a replacement who can deliver the sort of goals and the sort of assists that Johnson is providing at the minute. So I think absolutely they would have to move for someone like Wallace if that was to happen. And, given what we've seen from him in the Championship in the past in terms of what he too can produce in terms of both goals and assists, you feel like he would be a very sort of viable option for Forest to bring in to fill that void where they need to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And another player that has been linked, as a Johnson replacement is Josh Burler at Blackpool. Do you feel like he's more like for like with Johnson than somebody like Wallace? Of course, all the talk with Wallace has come without talk of Johnson leaving, really. It sounds like they want Wallace to add to their options in attack.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think it's sort of obviously, again, it's another one with a few variables to consider. I mean, personally, if it was to be one or the other, I would be leaning towards John Wallace in terms of his sort of, he's got that more experience in the Championship, and we know he can score goals and create at this level. So in that sense, from sort of that short term perspective, with regards to a promotion push this season, you might get that feeling that he's potentially more appealing option for Forest. But I think what you've got to consider is obviously he hasn't been featuring for Millwall at the minute because of an injury issue. So there would be questions there about whether he could come in and immediately sort of fill that void, and how long will it take him to get back up to speed when he does get back out there on the pitch. So that might push Forest in the direction of Burler, who, as well, it's worth noting, he's quite a bit younger than Wallace too. So from that sense, looking at it as a long-term option, he might be a more feasible option for Forest. Obviously, he's sort of a closer age to Johnson himself, his Bowler, so that might be tempting. But obviously, as you say, that Wallace and Johnson have sort of been mentioned separate, so it'd be a heck of a statement from Forest, even if Johnson does go, if they could say bring in Bowler as a replacement and then Wallace on top of that, because clearly he's a player who they seem to want, and it would be just a massive show of intent if they were to get him anyway.
Absolutely. The sticking point at the minute when it comes to Forest's pursuit of Wallace seems to be the fee. They can't agree the fee. What kind of figure do you have in mind for what Wallace is worth with only 6 months left on his deal at Millwall?
Yeah, it's a tough one, that, isn't it? And as we've sort of been saying with regards to Johnson come the summer, the fact that he will be so close to being able to leave on a free is obviously going to really knock that asking price down. But that being said, as important as Wallace would be to Forest if he was to join, he is as important, if not more important, to Millwall at the minute, you feel, when he is on top form. So in that sense, with obviously Forest being a Championship rival for Millwall and Wallace's importance to Gary Rowett's side, you think they're still going to want a sort of considerable fee for him? I don't think that they should be really setting a price that, you know, sort of pushes sides out of that potential range to buy him, because then they risk losing a player as good as him for free. But again, as I say, they want something that they could potentially reinvest and, you know, replacement for him. So I'd maybe be looking at somewhere around the £5-6 million mark as being sort of a decent balance between the two, where they can get something good for him if they want to, that they can then reuse in something else. But at the same time, they would be really sort of pushing a rival to come up with a good fee there. And obviously it would show to sort of their fans as well that they're not just rolling here, rolling over here. They've really made another big sort of promotion hopeful step up and put their money where their mouth is to get this deal done.
Yeah, I think you're right there, around the £5-6 million mark. And for me, that would be a sort of statement to say, look, he is going to a championship rival, which we don't really want. But, you know, we've put another couple of million on because of that. And I think the Millwall would be reasonably happy with a deal like that if he could agree at around the £5-6 million mark. That's, of course, what we know, that Millwall don't want to sell to a direct championship rival at the minute. My gut feeling is that if Wallace is going to go, it's going to be one that goes right up to the, you know, sort of deadline day in the last hours of the window. What's your gut feeling with it, Toby?
Yeah, I think I would probably agree with you on that, and potentially that's because Forest are going to want to keep hold of Johnson as well. And, you know, if they're battling to keep him as long as they can, but then say a Brentford or someone else from the Premier League does come in with a big bid really late on in the window, then perhaps they will be tempted to sell. And it's worth noting that if sort of a Premier League side were to stump up the sort of fee that Forest want for Johnson, then it would give them a lot of funds that would really put Millwall under pressure in terms of the offer they could potentially make for Wallace. So in that sense, you know, if a move for Johnson was to go through late, that could then open up more funds that Forest can put into a bid for Wallace. So in that sense, there could be a fair bit to come before that sort of move becomes more possible. I think, you know, we've got to say as well, sort of Gary Rowett, I was reading comments from him sort of earlier this week about Wallace sort of being a bit distracted by this speculation around his future. And you do wonder if in that sense Millwall are going to have to look at the situation from that respect and say, is it worth keeping him if he's not happy here and it's going to generate a bit of a distraction behind the scenes and in the dressing room, and is that going to do more bad than good for the club? And maybe in that sense it might as well, from that respect, become more sensible to sell him than keep him, and, you know, as you say, potentially open up to sort of any other issues behind the scenes. Not saying he's going to, you know, down tools or anything, but when that uncertainty is there, it's perhaps hard for him mentally to perform to that level that we know he can do, and whether that rubs off on teammates as well. So that could create its other range of issues. So obviously there's that to consider as well. And so I think with all those issues coming into play, it could be one that, as you say, does go right down to the wire when decisions are made on future of other players, whether they want to keep him, what the valuation is going to be. It could be one that, you know, we're sort of watching late into the night on Sky Sports on Monday evening.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to fall into place right across the window, and we're just talking about one domino effect there with Brennan, Johnson and Jed Wallace. It's going to be an exciting couple of days for sure. Right, that concludes this afternoon's debate show from myself and Toby. Thanks for joining me once again, Toby. Later on today, we've got the AFL Transfer Zone with George Douglas, where some of these deals might be on the agenda. I'm not too sure. There's so much going on right across the AFL to get stuck into, so please do make sure that you tune in for them. But until we're next on air, take care.